So my name is Scott Mitchell. I work with the Silver River Museum. There's my logo on my shirt. I am home because we have a better internet connection here. But today's museum mystery object is this thing right here. And I don't know if you all had a chance to print these worksheets. So there's a picture of our object. It's a sketch. And then there are some questions on the back for students. If you didn't get a chance to print this, that's okay. We'll go over it. It is on the portal if you do want to print it, but let me go to a PowerPoint presentation here. I have a better photo of that object that we will be talking about. All right, so we are talking about African-American history. The fourth quarter, by the way, we will be talking about military history, but today's museum mystery object is something that has to do with African-American history in Florida. In fact, right here in Marion County, and of course, the rest of the country for the whole United States. The sketch is on the left, but here's a photo of the real thing, and I'll describe it to you. It's made out of brass, and it's about the size of a tangerine or a small orange, kind of oblong shaped. It's flat, and it has some attachments on the back. So does anyone know what this is? Can you guys guess what this might be? And what in the world does it have to do with African-American history in the United States? Well, if you guessed belt buckle, you are on the right track. This is actually a soldier's belt buckle from the Civil War. Now, the Civil War took place in the United States between 1860 and 1865. So it was a long time ago, and a lot of people have forgotten the details, unless you're a real history buff and you're reading the books. People kind of know about the Civil War, and they kind of know that the northern states were fighting the southern states and slavery was an issue. But beyond that, they don't know a lot of the facts. But this belt buckle represents an important part of our nation's history, because even though the Civil War was a long time ago, guess what? It was super important to our country's history. It changed the course of our nation. And many people think for the better. We had some awful things going on in this country before the Civil War. After the Civil War, things weren't perfect, but they did outlaw slavery across the country after the war. So we're going to talk about this. This is a soldier's belt buckle. You see the letters on the belt buckle. What does it say? It's not a word, it's not us. That stands for United States. So this is a US or a Union soldier's belt buckle. The Union was the northern states, and the southern states were called the Confederate States. And in fact, the Confederates had belt buckles of their own that looked just like this, but it had the letters CSA, Confederate States of America. But today we're talking about the Union belt buckle, the soldier's belt buckle. Now, we're getting into the African-American history part, the Black history part. February coming up is Black History Month. Look at these soldiers and look at the belt buckles they're wearing. They have, you can't see the details, you can't read the letters, but these are the same exact belt buckles that these soldiers are wearing. Notice these are all African-American men, with the exception of this one fella over here. And look at the young boy, the drummer boy. They actually had kids who would join the army. They'd be part of the army, and they would play the beat on the drum to help the soldiers keep in line, and also to signal to the soldiers, turn right, turn left, stop, charge, go back, those types of things. But these drummer boys, gosh, they were 10, 11 years old, 12 years old, and they would go right into war with these soldiers. They, of course, don't do that anymore. But we had slavery in the United States. The northern states outlawed it, and they were pushing hard for the rest of the country to outlaw it. And the southern states, the Confederate states, did not want to do that. They relied on slave labor to do most of their work with all of the farming and the agriculture in the South. And so basically, the two sides went to war over this. Now, There were some other things that they were fighting about, but slavery and the right to have slaves was the main issue between the North and the South. At the beginning of the war, African-American men were not really accepted into the Union Army. There was still a lot of discrimination going on, and they weren't really treated fairly, even though they were free in those northern states. But as the war went on, the Army began to recruit African-American men into the Union Army and the Union Navy. And at the beginning of the war, they were treated pretty poorly. They were made to do just work, dig trenches and build walls and things like that. They weren't really used as soldiers should have been. But as the war went on and the Union Army officers began to realize how brave these men were and that they could fight just as good as any other Union soldier, they began to rely on them very heavily. And by the end of the war, they were fighting all over the South, helping the North to win the war. Now, here is a close-up. One really cool thing about the Civil War is, guess what they had during the Civil War? They had cameras. That's right. So this is an actual photograph of Union soldiers during the Civil War. And these guys are wearing those US belt buckles. Look at that. You can see the belt buckle right there. Wait, let me go back. Oh, this is another shot. Here's another soldier with his Union belt buckle, another Union Civil War soldier, probably an Army soldier. And here's one of those drummer boys. He looks like he's about 12 years old. It says Taylor the drummer boy. So this is the photograph we were looking at. These are actually soldiers from the Civil War with all their equipment. Now, who was the president during the Civil War? His name's on this piece of paper, right in the middle. There's a picture of him. Abraham Lincoln, that's right. Abraham Lincoln was the president during the Civil War. And a couple of years into the war in 1863, he issued a presidential order where he got up in front of a bunch of people and he said, this is what you guys got to do. This is my order. It was called the Emancipation Proclamation. And a proclamation is where you're saying something to everybody. And emancipate means to free or to set free. So President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 officially made the slaves in the Confederate States free. Now, there was a catch to this. The Union had to win the war in order for the Confederates to actually give the slaves their freedom. They weren't going to do it on their own. The other catch was the Emancipation Proclamation did not set all of the slaves free. There were, well, let me back up. The red states are the Confederate states, and you can see Florida was part of the Confederate states. These were the slave-holding states in the South, the Confederates or the CSA. The dark blue was the Union states or the federal troops. So California, Nevada, these three states out west, these were the Union. Here's the catch. The light blue states were known as border states. And these gray areas, these were called territories. These weren't even states quite yet. So the Emancipation Proclamation did not give the slaves in these border states or the Western territories their freedom, because historians think that President Lincoln did not want to upset those states. So the Emancipation Proclamation only it only had jurisdiction over these red states, these Confederate states. Now, it is very important, and I'm not saying it was not important, because here's what happened after President Lincoln gave the Emancipation Proclamation. Lots and lots of free African-American men living in the northern states, and lots of slaves that escaped from the southern states and went up to the northern states. Guess what they did? They joined the army. So here's what happened. By the end of the war, the Union had about 200,000 African-American soldiers and sailors fighting for them to help them win the war. And this is one of the reasons that the Union was successful. They were victorious. They had more factories, they had more soldiers, they were able to wear the southern states down, and it was a bloody, awful war because you had Americans fighting Americans. And no wars are good, but this one was particularly bad because you had actually neighbors fighting with neighbors. So in the end, in 1865, the North won and slavery was outlawed all across the United States, which helped us to get onto a path where we are today. I'm not saying that everything was perfect after the Civil War, and everything's not perfect in modern times either. But think about if the Union had not won the Civil War. Think about how different our country would be today. Now, in Florida, we had only one or two big Civil War battles, and one of them was called the Battle of Olustee, and it was up near Lake City, north of Gainesville, about an hour and a half, 2 hours from Ocala. It was the largest Civil War battle in Florida, and the African-American Union soldiers were there fighting, and they were actually able to save most of the other Union soldiers from being overrun and wiped out by the Confederates. And here you can see the Confederates back here across this pond. There's a railroad line. We have all these soldiers, and you can see lots of these Union soldiers. They have blue coats, and these guys are fighting. This is a painting of the Battle of Olustee. Now, the other thing that I want you to know is right here in Marion County, out by the Ocklawaha River during the Civil War, there were some sugar plantations. They raised sugarcane, and they had slaves, and they would make sugarcane syrup. That was one of their products. And the only time we had Union soldiers, well, let me back up a step. Marion County and Florida were controlled by the Confederates. So they were part of the Confederate states. And the only time we had Union soldiers come into Marion County was at the end of the war in 1865. And guess what? They were African-American federal troops. They were Union soldiers, just like the guys in that photograph I showed you, that marched down from Jacksonville, and they attacked several plantations. They freed the slaves. They destroyed a bunch of the farm equipment and took a bunch of horses and wagons and things, and they started to head back to Jacksonville. And they had kind of this running gun battle with the local Confederate militia soldiers here, but they were successful in their raid. And so that's an important part of our local history here. The only time we really had anything that even resembled a Civil War battle in Marion County, it was that Marshall Plantation raid. There's actually a historical marker on the side of the road out near the Ocklawaha River that says Marshall Plantation raid. So the big picture here is that these men, these brave men that fought to end slavery and to make the country one country again, these guys were really brave, and you don't hear about it very often. Of course, the Civil War took place so long ago that a lot of people have forgotten about this, but it is a very important part of our history, in our country, and also in Florida, and certainly in Marion County. So with that, I will also tell you that in the museum here at the Silver River, we have a very nice exhibit on local African-American history. And there is some information on these Union soldiers that were fighting out there at the Marshall Plantation raid and the Battle of Olustee. We have information on those soldiers in the Silver River Museum in the exhibits. And then also here in Ocala, we have the Black History Museum of Marion County, and it's over at the Howard Academy Center. And they actually have artifacts that were dug up by archaeologists from the Battle of Olustee. And so if you want to see some of those things, you can go to those two museums and check them out in person. But with that, I am going to go over some of these questions on the back of the sheet. So the first one, it says, explain who would have worn this belt buckle and why it's important to African-American history in the United States. Well, we talked about how the soldiers wore those belt buckles, and they were fighting for the Union. And one of the main issues was to end slavery in the United States. It was probably the main issue. And they were victorious. They won, and it helped to put our country on the path that led us to where we are today. Second question, who issued the Emancipation Proclamation? Do we remember the name of the president during the Civil War that issued the Emancipation Proclamation? Why was it so important? And list some of the weaknesses of this new presidential order. Remember how we said it didn't apply to slaves in certain parts of the country. Those were some of the weaknesses. It was a very good thing, but it didn't set everyone free across the country. All right, explain how this belt buckle relates to Florida and Marion County in particular. We talked about that too. We talked about the Battle of Olustee and the Marshall Plantation raids. And then finally, how did the role of African-American soldiers fighting for the North change during the Civil War? Remember, at the beginning, they weren't really trusted or treated very well. And by the end of the war, the Army was really relying on them, and they were in the middle of most battles and considered extremely brave. By the way, the original document, the handwritten Emancipation Proclamation that was actually written by President Lincoln, is in the National Archives, which is kind of like a museum for papers, in Washington, D.C. You could actually go and look at the original Emancipation Proclamation that President Lincoln wrote out in his own hand. It's about 5 pages long, I believe. If you look online, teachers, you can actually find photocopies of the original, and it's really fascinating. It's amazing that it's still there. So anyway, that's the overview for the Union Soldier belt buckle. And if there are any questions, please send them to me in chat and we will try to answer them. So does anybody have any questions about the Civil War or the belt buckle or these brave soldiers that fought to keep our country together? If they would have lost, we would have ended up with 2 countries and it would have been a mess. Any questions? And teachers, by the way, we have 3 more of these museum mystery episodes for the 3rd quarter that have to do with African-American history. And then for the 4th quarter, toward the end of the school year, we shift over and we will focus on military history in Florida. So we'll be talking about things like the Spanish-American War and the Seminole Wars and things like that. That'll be next quarter. Anyone have any questions that they want to ask? Okay, I am not seeing questions. And if you all think of some later, you can always email me at the Silver River Museum. I'm pretty easy to find, Scott Mitchell, and I have a school board email. So with that, I will hope to see you guys back in a week or so, and we'll talk about our next museum mystery object. Miss Benavides, our teacher at the Silver River, will be sending out reminders with links. And I hope you all have a good rest of the day and a great rest of the week, and we will see you again soon. Thank you. Bye.